Welcome to Balanced Beauty Talks, the podcast where we redefine skin health through a holistic lens.
I'm Natasha, an esthetician and nutritional practitioner passionate about helping you nourish your skin from the inside out.
I'm Dr. Khadija, an esthetician and naturopathic doctor here to explore the natural pathways to radiant skin.
And I'm Alicia, an esthetician and skincare enthusiast. Together, we're diving deep into the world of aesthetics, merging modern treatments with internal wellness so you can achieve long-lasting results without compromising your health.
Whether you're a seasoned professional looking to elevate your practice or someone seeking effective solutions for conditions like acne, you're in the right place.
Join us as we share expert insights, inspiring stories, and practical tips that empower you to embrace a truly balanced approach to beauty.
So get cozy and prepare to transform the way you think about skincare.
Welcome to Balanced Beauty Talks.
Please note that the information provided in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. Your health and well-being are important, and we encourage you to make informed decisions.
Welcome back to Balanced Beauty Talks. Today, we're exploring the connection between your gut, thyroid, and skin, what's known as the gut-thyroid-skin axis. You'll learn how imbalances in your thyroid can show up on your skin, how gut health plays a surprising role, and what nutrients, food, and lifestyle practices can support your skin and hormones. If you have ever struggled with unexplained dry skin, stubborn acne, hair thinning, or dull complexion, it might be more than just your skincare routine. It could be your thyroid.
Okay, so maybe you, Dr. Khadija, should explain the very basics of the thyroid, its hormones, what it all consists of.
Sure. Okay, so I'll try and keep this simple because there's a lot you can say about the thyroid, but basically the thyroid is a gland. It's like a little butterfly-shaped gland that sits in your throat. And it's the best way to think about it is like it's the thermostat for your whole body. So it regulates a lot of things for your body, especially your metabolism. And so it kind of determines when to speed things up and when to slow things down. And so it's related to metabolism. It can increase or decrease your heart rate. It has a lot to do with weight changes, with your mood, with energy, digestion. It's going to basically regulate when it needs to change these, the speed with which these different processes occur in your body. So the way the hormones work, the thyroid itself responds to a specific hormone that is released by the brain. Your pituitary gland will release something called TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That's a hormone that people have heard of before. If you've ever had any blood work done for your thyroid, typically you'll have had your TSH tested. But that is just testing the signal that your thyroid is getting from the brain. The thyroid itself has to produce active thyroid hormones. And so you have T3 and T4. Those are both produced by your thyroid, and that is what has activity on the body or tissues. T4 is basically an inactive version of your thyroid hormone. T3 is actually the most active. So T4 is kind of more like a storage hormone. T3 is what is doing the most in the body. And so that's a really, really important hormone. Your thyroid will produce T4 and T3, but a lot of the T4 has to be converted into T3 in the body. And most of that conversion happens in the liver. So the liver is also a huge part of thyroid regulation and thyroid response because most of that conversion is happening there. You do have other areas in the body that will support that conversion. The gut is a big one. The kidneys and just in general, other parts of your body will support that conversion. But that's kind of the basics of the hormones. So you have the TSH, you have T3 and T4.
So what is the difference between hypothyroid and hyperthyroid?
So hypothyroid is basically an underfunctioning thyroid. So think about it, if you're thinking about metabolism or just the processes of the body, you think about everything slowing down. So people with hypothyroidism typically will have weight gain. You'll notice there's like a sluggish digestive system, so a lot of constipation happens, dry skin, acne is common, you get really cold. Those are kind of the main symptoms of hypothyroidism. Hyper is just basically the opposite. So it's an over-functioning thyroid. So all those processes are sped up. So you notice an increased heart rate, weight loss, anxiety is really common, looser stools is common, just a lot of heat in the body, really common. So they're very opposite of each other. Hypo is under-functioning, hyper is over-functioning.
Okay, so how that looks on the skin. With hypothyroidism, you typically see a lot more of a dry, rough skin. It can be flaky, it can be dull in complexion. There's a lot of thinning on the outward part of the eyebrows with hyperthyroidism as well. So that is a good indicator. Those people typically also are dealing with a puffier face, puffy eyes frequently. They have slower skin cell turnover, so they may be prone to more acne, more texture, and just more noticeable fine lines as well. And then with hyperthyroidism, it's almost the opposite. So they are excessively warm and moist. They have sweaty skin often. There's a lot of itchy, irritated skin. They have more heat sensitivities. They're more reactive to products. And yeah, it just looks more thin and fragile. So why don't you describe a little bit what makes hyper and hypothyroidism autoimmune?
So when you just have hypo or hyperthyroidism, you're looking at the thyroid hormone. So hypothyroidism has a reduced production of the thyroid hormones. Hyper has an increased production of the thyroid hormones. An autoimmune condition can present very similarly, even on blood work. Sometimes you don't even see it on blood work. But the difference there is that you have antibodies that are being produced to the thyroid. There's different antibodies that are produced in a hypo autoimmune condition versus a hyper autoimmune condition. But essentially, you are creating antibodies that are attacking the thyroid. And then when that happens, it puts you into this state of hypo or hyperthyroidism. But the thing with those is often they are missed. And we can talk about maybe blood work a bit later, but they're missed because you have to test the antibodies to catch it, because often a lot of these autoimmune conditions will fluctuate a lot. You'll go from hypo to hyper and you'll fluctuate back and forth. So sometimes when you do basic blood work without testing your antibodies, you're not catching the antibodies, or you're not catching it when it is in that state of hyper or hypothyroidism. So symptoms can actually be very similar when you have an autoimmune condition. Sometimes they can be a little bit more extreme, but you'll also kind of notice that some symptoms again will fluctuate. You'll go back and forth between two different conditions. And then treatment is also where it changes, which we can talk about too a little bit later, because you're going to target treatment differently when it's autoimmune versus when it's not autoimmune.
So besides some of those skin symptoms that we already spoke about, are there any other ones that maybe stand out, maybe not specifically to skin, but to the eye, that could maybe indicate that that might be a concern?
Do you mean just thyroid in general, or?
So Hashimoto's, for example, versus Graves' disease.
Hashimoto's, I feel like it's very hypothyroid, the symptoms. Graves' disease has they have some characteristics with Graves' disease that kind of make it very noticeable. Graves' disease tends to have this kind of, the eyes tend to bulge a little bit, and that has to do with the muscles behind the eye that get affected by the antibodies. And so you can see that kind of like wide-eyed look that's very common for Graves' disease. There's also this kind of swelling that you'll see on the shins that's really common. Those I'd say are the kind of main ones you'd see in Graves'. I don't know with Hashimoto's as much, because I feel like that one often very closely mimics just a hypothyroid.
Yeah, just more inflammatory skin condition present there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the gut-thyroid-skin axis. So the gut is actually responsible for 20% of the conversion of T4 to T3. And so it is really important for that gut to be in a healthy condition in order to have that healthy thyroid hormone balance. So when there is a gut dysbiosis, which is another fancy word for a gut imbalance, so not proper good and bad bacteria, enzymes, acids, everything else that you need for digestion, that can really affect that conversion of T4 to T3. So that could lead to hypothyroidism. Sluggish hormones means sluggish thyroid. And that may not lead to an autoimmune condition, but like Khadija was saying, there can be a difference between just hypothyroidism and actual Hashimoto's. If there is an autoimmune condition, oftentimes that is associated with leaky gut, not just the dysbiosis, but this is where another term for food, proteins, toxins, and such getting through the gut lining and into the bloodstream. So that sends the body into a bit of a frenzy, has an immune response, and those antibodies can collect in certain areas. And oftentimes with autoimmune conditions, they are very genetically predisposed. So when your body is in a constant immune response, that can lead to autoimmune conditions. So in this case, it could be Hashimoto's, it could be Graves' disease, and this can really affect the skin, as we mentioned.
So anytime you have any kind of autoimmune condition where you're producing antibodies, like you said, there's other things you want to consider too where antibodies could be produced. So one is like leaky gut or food sensitivities. Celiac disease is another one. If the body has that kind of response where it's producing antibodies, it will likely be producing antibodies elsewhere too. So typically we want to look at something like celiac antibodies, look at food sensitivities, as well as all your thyroid antibodies. And there's other antibodies you can run too, because inflammatory response is so intense with autoimmune conditions that you want to cover all your bases, because you're going to have multiple different types of symptoms that you need to kind of rule out and make sure it's not just the thyroid. It could be other things as well.
And you always hear people, say autoimmune disease starts in the gut. This is why, because when we have dysbiosis, when we are having quote unquote leaky gut symptoms, that can really, it sends the immune system into a response that is very stressful for the body and naturally can turn into an autoimmune disease. So when you diagnose with autoimmune, start with the gut.
Always. With thyroid conditions, if you think about the way metabolism works, for example, with hypothyroidism, you get that more sluggish metabolism. You also have to think about the liver. The liver is also going to slow down. So you might be in a hypothyroid state. You're going to be producing less of your active T3 hormone. But in general, the liver is now functioning at a lower capacity than it usually does. So that means all your other hormones that are recycled and go through the liver and the other jobs of the liver, all of that slows down. So that affects your digestion, but it can affect other hormones like estrogen, progesterone, everything that gets recycled through the liver. You have to kind of think about now the impact systemically from that.
What is the optimal way to test thyroid?
So you want to get some blood work done for the thyroid. So honestly, the best test of your thyroid is to do a full thyroid panel. So that means testing TSH, which we talked about in the beginning. That's your thyroid stimulating hormone produced by your brain. Then you want T3 tested. You want T4 tested, because those are your actual thyroid hormones. And then you want to make sure you're getting your antibodies tested. So there's something called anti-TPO, which is a test for Hashimoto's. That is the antibody that is present in Hashimoto's disease. And then there's thyroglobulin, which is another antibody that you want to check. There's also something called reverse T3, which I won't get into detail too much here, but if there's a huge concern with the thyroid and you're really not sure what's happening with the conversion of T4 to T3, reverse T3 is another thing you can test, because T4 can shunt some of its hormone into reverse T3 instead of the active T3. So if you're concerned that there's not a proper conversion happening there, then test that as well to see what's happening to your T4. But that's a full panel. Conventionally, what happens is if a doctor is suspecting that there is a thyroid condition, they usually just run TSH on its own, and they will look and see if that number is out of range. The issue with that is that the range for TSH is very, very wide. So it ranges from 0 up to 6, I think it is now. And so people could be sitting under 6, but be really experiencing thyroid symptoms. So you could be sitting at like a 4.5 or a 5, which would indicate possibly an underfunctioning or a hypothyroid, but you're not considered truly hypothyroid until you're out of the range. And so that's kind of where naturopathic medicine comes in. And that's why if we are suspecting a thyroid condition, we will run the full panel, just because we need to see, okay, is the TSH like slightly not where it should be? Then what is your T3 and T4 doing? And if your T3 and T4 are acting okay, then maybe we just need to monitor it. If the antibodies are okay, we just need to monitor. But if we catch something else off there, then we can optimize your TSH. But again, that would vary depending on symptoms. Like we have to take the full picture into account. But that's what we want to do with naturopathic testing is make sure we're looking at everything before we completely just rule it out based on one TSH number.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you have a thyroid condition, are there holistic ways to support your thyroid?
Yeah. So definitely there's a lot of things you can do for your thyroid. Diet is going to be huge. But on the supplement side or the nutrient side, you want to be looking. So for example, with hypothyroidism, you want to be looking at that conversion. That's a really important part of treating the thyroid, because it requires a lot of specific nutrients to help that conversion go from T4 to T3. So selenium is one of those things. Zinc is another one. Iron plays a role. Magnesium plays a role. In general, your B vitamins are going to help. So making sure that that is supported, that's a really nice, gentle way to kind of support the thyroid. One step back from that, though, too, is looking at adrenal health, which I think we've kind of touched on in other episodes. But A very gentle way of supporting the thyroid is to have someone on an adrenal support like ashwagandha, or like any very gentle adrenal herb will kind of help support the thyroid, because there is a role between cortisol production and the thyroid. So that's kind of what I do. And then diet, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do.
Yeah, so there's diet, the importance of stress reduction and management, like you mentioned. The role of sleep and the circadian rhythm is also really important, but a little bit more into food. So depending on diagnosis, again, iodine can be a helpful source. This is something you could get from seaweed, you can get from fish, iodized salt. Anti-inflammatory diet is really important too. Obviously, with an autoimmune diagnosis, there's definitely inflammation both in the gut and possibly systemically in the body. So thinking anti-inflammatory with your foods, whether that be leafy greens, berries, omega-3 foods like chia, fish, turmeric, things like that are all really helpful. And then protein is really great as well. So protein is actually needed to transport thyroid hormone. And so if you're not getting enough protein in your diet regularly throughout the day, then that can cause some problems as well.
Yeah. Just going back to the iodine thing. So the reason iodine is so important is because T3 and T4, the 4 is 4 iodines and the 3 is 3 iodines. That's the structure of those hormones. So it's very important for your thyroid hormones, but you want to be careful when you are considering an autoimmune condition, because if you are supplementing with iodine or you're taking a lot of foods with iodine, you can actually aggravate it a lot further. And so iodine, I would say if you are kind of playing around with that, make sure you have your testing done before you bring in anything related to that. So it's important, but just with caution.
Yeah. And a little bit more on the sleep as well. So thyroid is regulated by your brain, and your brain is running on a circadian clock. So if you're not getting proper sleep, or you have a really off shift work type of pattern, it can really send things into a frenzy. So like poor sleep equals reduced thyroid output and increased cortisol, and it's all just kind of a perfect recipe for problems.
Yeah.
So try to get 7 to 9 hours minimum a night. Avoid those screens an hour before. Meditate a little bit before too. Binaural beats, all the things. Those will really help to support thyroid health. So.
Yes, and magnesium, because we love that. We talk about it every time.
Magnesium
does everything. I think something that helps a lot is kind of hearing personal stories of situations like this, especially in relation to skin, or when you're not sure what's going on with your skin and you want to look into the thyroid more. So I know, Natasha, you've had a bit of an experience with this, so if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So I was dealing with really bad acne for a very long time. Well, off and on throughout my whole life, but there was a point where it just was so inflammatory and so painful. And I was dealing with a lot of other symptoms, and it took a really long time. But after some research, I felt that possibly there was some thyroid issues going on. So sure enough, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease, and I was on medication for a short period, but it got to a point where we were constantly changing my dosing. And with Graves' disease, it's a little bit more serious than hypo, because you can actually go into cardiac arrest with it, and it really increases anxiety. And like Dr. Khadija was mentioning, it can really affect the eyes as well. And so it's not something that you want to let go. And so often people who are diagnosed with Graves' disease, the treatment is usually to reverse it into hypo. And so then you're bound to medication for the rest of your life to supplement what hormones you do need while you're hypo. So they do that by either removing your thyroid, radioactive iodine, but it was moving so quickly that I was given the choice of essentially surgery. And I was so young and I wasn't really ready for that. And I just felt like I hadn't explored enough options. And so I've always been keen on the naturopathic world, hadn't personally explored it a whole lot, but just in my home. And so I went to go see a naturopathic doctor. Immediately, he said, let's do a food sensitivity test. And on that test, I'm not kidding, over 85% of the foods were showing up in the red. So there's 3 categories on a food sensitivity test. There's green, yellow, and red. Green means you don't have an immune response to it. Yellow means there's a little bit, so have it with moderation, and red is like, ooh, that's creating a lot of inflammation. Let's eliminate it. And so for me to have 85% of 200 plus foods show up in the red, that was a very clear indication that I had leaky gut. And so, like we said earlier, autoimmune conditions typically start in the gut. So that was his immediate, like, okay, this is where we need to start. We're going to start with a supportive diet according to this food sensitivity test, which was tough because it was very hard to minimize 85% of the foods that I was typically eating. But I was just so determined and ready to go. So we did that. We did a liver cleanse. We supported my adrenals, and within 3 months, the results were almost non-existent. I think it was 3 months. And then 1 month later, I remember going back and it was completely gone and I was in full remission. And yeah, so it just goes to show, like, holy, I was about to go for a life surgery. Like, it would have affected my whole life. Yeah. And, you know, that's not something for everybody. And there, again, it is so serious when you get diagnosed with Graves', and it's not something you want to kind of lollygag with. Like, you really want to make sure you're supported with practitioners. But and in some cases, like, it is necessary to take those more aggressive steps. But I was young and was determined, and I just wanted to give one more shot. And I said, like, you know, I'm going to commit to this for the next 6 months. If I can't make change, then I'll commit to that. But yeah, like I said, within 3 to 4 months, I was in complete remission. And so huge changes in my skin as well. Yeah, I took a very holistic approach. Besides the food and the cleanses and whatnot, I also, like, really looked at my entire life, eliminated all the stressors. And yeah, it just was exactly what inspired me to become a holistic nutritional practitioner, and which resulted in Natology. That whole experience was the catalyst to Natology and doing what we do here. So,
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, I feel like that's just a testament to, like, getting multiple opinions and not just kind of, I mean, every situation is so different, and you do, like you said, you need to kind of do those aggressive approaches for some people, but it's so nice to have the option to look into alternatives and take all that information in and then make decisions appropriately. And sometimes you need both. Like, sometimes you need a little bit. Some people need medication support and the naturopathic support and the diet, and they need to do both at the same time. So it's not that one way or the other is better or worse. It's just you have a lot of options out there. So make sure you're exploring that and take advantage of that for your health. Yeah.
And I think I maybe need to clarify too, when I say eliminated 85% of those foods, you know, that's not forever. It's just temporarily to cool down your body, to take away the inflammation. Your body can't heal in a state of chronic inflammation. And so it just takes that down so that you can actually heal. And so, yeah, when I was testing negative to Graves' disease, I slowly started to implement those foods back again. And I've never had diagnosis since. I get checked yearly. So yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. Story. With that said, if you feel that any of the symptoms we spoke about resonate with you, if you've been trying to clear your acne or any other inflammatory skin conditions and you just haven't seen a push with it, perhaps this is something that you're dealing with, definitely go see a naturopathic doctor, get multiple opinions. We've given you the tools now to know exactly what to ask for when it comes to testing. And if you have any questions or would like any support or direction, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to help you. Okay, so let's jump into our Ask an SD segment.
Okay, so our question today is it better to have a simple routine or a 10-step routine?
Yeah, I think that depends on the individual, honestly. I think you have to be realistic about your life and what you're willing to do. If you're a simple person, I don't think you need a 10-step routine, because I think those products will probably sit on the shelf and collect some dust, or you'll forget how to use them, or they'll expire. As long as you're getting the basics, a good cleanser, some moisturizer, and an SPF, there's always room for growth. But you want to get those steps down and make sure that you're seeing a professional so that you have the right products for your skin. And then there's lots of room to build and grow and just baby steps. But yeah, if you're a really simple person, let's scale it back. 10 steps seems extreme. So
I feel like it also depends on the condition, because sometimes with acne, if I'm seeing someone who's just very inflamed and there's a lot going on, I'd rather them do a very simple routine to start, just scale it way back and then, like, slowly introduce things as their skin gets stronger. So yeah, it's so dependent on the person.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, thanks again for listening. If you guys have any questions that you'd like to have answered in the Ask an SD segment at the end of each episode, definitely just leave it in the comments, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.